Look at any map and you'll see borders, the tiny lines that mark which territory belongs to which country. Borders form for different reasons, from natural boundaries like mountain ranges or rivers, the result of war, conquest, modern treaties, or simply the place where people settled a long time ago. But the thing about borders is that they aren't as clearly defined as you might think. They appear inherently political, and many borders are therefore disputed. It's just that most are not worth a conflict to resolve the issue. Yet still, if you look at this map of border disputes in the world, it's basically most countries. It's an issue in almost every corner of the globe. So, in this video, we'll look at every single border dispute in the world. We'll skip ongoing conflicts as we already covered those in another video. So, let's start our trip in Morocco, or rather, Western Sahara. See, Morocco claims this territory but only controls about 75% of it. The rest is ruled as the, quote, Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, ruled by a rebel group known as the Polisario Front. Historically, Morocco was colonized by both France and Spain, and Western Sahara was a separate Spanish colony. Morocco has claimed the territory since 1957, and when Spain granted Western Sahara its independence in 1975, Morocco annexed it, sending in 350,000 Moroccans. Moroccan forces fought the Polisario Front in a 16-year guerrilla war ending in a truce in 1991 and forming the current de facto border between the Moroccan-controlled and the Sahrawi side. Towards the end of the Trump administration, the United States recognized the territory as Morocco's in exchange for Morocco recognizing Israel. This made the US and Israel the first and second countries to recognize Morocco's rule over the area. Moving north, these two dots on the Mediterranean are actually two Spanish cities despite being on the Moroccan side of the sea. Ceuta and Melilla have about 85,000 inhabitants each and have been part of Spain since the 15th and 17th centuries respectively. Their location has prompted many to jump the fence separating the territories from Morocco to enter Europe without crossing the sea. Morocco contests the territories and claims that the two cities and some nearby islands rightfully belong to them. If we head across the Mediterranean to the tip of Iberia, we come to a territory that is not Spanish but British. See, Gibraltar is an incredibly strategic location, with the African coast closest to Europe less than 9 miles away. The British have controlled the area since 1704, and Spain ceded the territory in a 1713 treaty. Still, since the 20th century, Spain has called for its decolonization, and disputes that anything outside the city walls belong to the UK. It's a bit ironic since Morocco says the same thing about Ceuta and Melilla. Anyways, heading to the southwest corner of Spain, we come to Olivença. The city was part of Portugal for 500 years, and according to an 1815 treaty, it should be again. But you see, Spain just never really got around to do it. Portugal still does not recognize the territory as part of Spanish territory to this day, but there's pretty much nothing they can do about it. Next up, let's head way up north to Rockall Island, a rock 4 countries are fighting over for fishing rights. See, if they could claim the island as theirs, theoretically they could expand their exclusive economic zone. But in reality, the island is too small to be inhabited, and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea does not grant an EEZ to rocks. Moving along, we head to France, where the border between Italy and France over Mont Blanc, the highest peak in Europe, is disputed. This area below the peak is disputed between both France and Italy. Okay, so it seems that's all Western Europe has to argue over, so let's head to the Balkans, where several unresolved issues from the breakup of Yugoslavia remain. The highest peak in the Sumbarak Mountains is disputed between Slovenia and Croatia, who give them both unpronounceable names. Croatia and Serbia disagree on who owns the islands on their border along the Danube River, but Serbia controls all but one of them. Siga, the one on the Croatian side of the border, is considered no man's land, which led a Czech politician to declare it as Liberland, a libertarian micronation. Next to Croatia is Kosovo, a country that declared independence from Serbia in 2008. The US and little more than half of UN member states recognize Kosovo, but Serbia does not, nor does its major ally, Russia. Nearby, the Drina River serves as the border between Serbia and Bosnia-Herzegovina, and the two countries dispute certain sections. Heading northeast out of the Balkans, you hit Transnistria, a region of Moldova bordering Ukraine. It broke away from Moldova in 1990 and is defended by 1,500 Russian troops. Some have worried that the territory would be the starting point for a Russian invasion of Moldova, but the territory is landlocked by countries hostile to Russia, and so far nothing has come of it. Ukraine is obviously in the middle of a massive conflict with Russia at the moment, and Russia has officially annexed Crimea and 4 other oblasts of Ukraine as part of its territory. But Ukraine also has a dispute with another neighbor, Romania, over a small island called K Island, which started forming in the Black Sea in the early 2000s. The island is currently divided between the two countries, and without anything on it, isn't really Ukraine's priority at the moment. Now we head east to the country of Georgia, where Russia has supported the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are internationally recognized as part of Georgia. But Georgia maintains that Russia has occupied the territory since the Georgian-Russian War in 2008. At its southern end, Georgia disputes the border with Azerbaijan, where there is a monastery complex. And as you know from our every ongoing conflict video, Azerbaijan recently retook the Nagorno-Karabakh region from Armenia. Still, the border between the two countries remains disputed, and a new conflict could break out at any time. Next, we head east to the Aegean Sea, where we recently did an entire video about the possibility that aggression between Greece and Turkey could spiral into a conflict. The two small islands, known as Emia or Kardak, nearly sparked a war back in 1996. The dispute remains unresolved, along with disagreements over territorial waters and freedom of navigation. Further southeast, the island of Cyprus has been divided since 1974 between the Republic of Cyprus, an EU member, and the Turkish-controlled North Cyprus. We don't have time to dig into the fascinating history of the island and the conflict in this video, but it's important to note that it's unresolved. The UN maintains a buffer zone on the border between the two zones. Not that far east is Hatay, a province of Turkey that is still claimed by Syria, but that's hardly the only place where Syria has a major border dispute. Here we find Deir al-Asha, part of 36 disputed areas between Lebanon and Syria. Lebanon occupies the land, but Syria regularly violates their sovereignty, at least from Lebanon's point of view, because there is no treaty officially marking the border between the two countries. A bit further south, close to the Lebanese town of Shibah, sits Shibah Farms. Given the name, you would imagine it to be farmland tended to by farmers from Shibah, as was the case historically, but the territory was ruled by Syria from the 1950s until 1967, when Israel took over most of Syria's Golan Heights region. Shibah Farms is now claimed by Lebanon, but occupied by Israel. The Golan Heights area is occupied by Israel, but claimed by Syria. Speaking of Israel, we can't talk about border disputes without mentioning the West Bank. The area has a long and tragic history with many nuances, which we don't have time for today, but you can understand a lot by looking at 3 maps. First, this is the UN Resolution 181 map, which divided the then British colony of Palestine into a Jewish and an Arab state. Jerusalem was deemed a separate international area due to its importance to 3 major religions. Israel declared independence in May 1948, and 5 Arab countries, Egypt, Jordan, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, immediately invaded. The war was pretty brutal and included the Nakba, which is Arabic for catastrophe, which refers to the forced removal of 750,000 Palestinians to the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. Since 1967, when Israel took the West Bank from Jordan in the Six-Day War, Israel has also controlled the West Bank and Jerusalem. Still, most maps of the region today look like this, with a clear demarcation between Israel and Palestinian territories marked by the so-called Green Line, established in 1949. But the thing is, the Palestinians don't have their own country. First of all, only 143 countries out of 193 UN members recognize Palestine. Secondly, and more importantly, it is not really governed as a complete country. Since 2007, Hamas, an Islamist political party with a military wing, has governed the Gaza Strip. However, in the West Bank, the Palestinian National Authority, led by the Fatah party, essentially acts as a national Palestinian government. Except it doesn't. See, look at this map. and you'll see that Israel controls the majority of the West Bank. The Palestinian-administered territories are a patchwork of mostly unconnected blobs of land, only making up about 40% of the territory. But that's not all. These are the 130 plus Israeli settlements, or the new towns and villages Israelis have built inside the West Bank since 1967, despite the UN claiming it is illegal to do so. And as Benjamin Netanyahu's government continues to heavily promote the expansion of settlements, it's hard to imagine this issue being resolved anytime soon. So now that I've likely pissed off both my pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian viewers, let's move to something that's controversial: the border between Egypt and Sudan. There are 3 disputed areas along the border, the result of British colonial boundaries, but they are all pretty silly. First, Territorial is a useless part of the desert that neither country has bothered to claim. Next is the Wadi Halfa salient, a territory on the Nile River where the British had moved the border north as it was easier to access from Sudan. After the Aswan Dam was constructed, all of the inhabited parts of the territory were flooded. Finally, there is the Halab Triangle, which Sudan evacuated in 2000, letting Egypt take over, but for some reason continuing to claim the land. Moving along, we find the peninsula of Ras Dumeira and Dumeira Island a bit further down. Eritrea and Djibouti fought a war over the territory in 2008, and Eritrea occupied the land after Qatari peacekeepers left in 2017. Still, the two countries normalized their relations in 2018. Now, we'll come back to Africa later, I promise, but let's move on to this small island in the Persian Gulf near the strategic Strait of Hormuz and major shipping lanes for Gulf countries. Abu Musa was part of British territories in the Persian Gulf, including what is now the UAE, until they announced they would leave the territories in 1968. But in 1971, Iran moved its troops onto the island and has controlled it ever since, despite the UAE's objections. They still dispute Iran's occupation to this day, but it remains in Iran's hands. Now let's head northeast a bit to the borders between Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan. It's pretty clear that there are some weird holes in these borders, which are the enclaves in the Fergana and Isfara valleys, long home to a diversity of Kyrgyz, Tajik, and Uzbek populations. They were once all part of the Soviet Union, but are now independent nations. Today, around a third of the Kyrgyz-Tajik border is disputed. In 2021, violence broke out around some of these enclaves over water management, perhaps unsurprising in this arid region. In September 2022, fighting broke out between troops from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, leaving 59 dead and 140,000 people displaced, and the dispute remains to be resolved. Moving along, we meet the disputed territories between India and Pakistan. See, the two countries were once both part of British India until the British abruptly left in 1947, leading to the partition of India and the creation of Pakistan, a new country for Muslims. Up in the Himalayas, the territory of Kashmir was ruled by a Maharaja who wanted Kashmir to remain independent. But after some Pakistani tribesmen invaded, India helped fend them off, and so he chose to join India. A war broke out between India and Pakistan, and since 1949 the territory has remained divided between the two at the line of control between Pakistan-administered Kashmir and Indian-administered Kashmir. Next to Indian-administered Kashmir is Aksai Chin, which is administered by China but claimed by India. And India and China have some serious disputes. After going to war in 1962, when China occupied Aksai Chin, the two countries have had an uneasy relationship. And in 2020, it turned fatal for the first time since 1975. In June 2020, Indian and Chinese troops fought with sticks and clubs, which might not seem that dangerous, but it killed at least 20 Indian and 4 Chinese soldiers. Another clash broke out in December of 2022 as well. Elsewhere in India, China also claims India's Sikkim state and most of Arunachal Pradesh state, and clashes have broken out in both in recent years. India has also had some minor squabbles with its neighbor Nepal. In 2020, India opened a road through the Himalayas to China, passing through Kalapani, a territory claimed by Nepal. Nepal accused India of changing the status quo without diplomatic consultations. On the other side of Nepal, the territory of Susta is administered by Nepal but claimed by India. A river changed course, and Nepal continues to claim some territory on India's side of of the river. Elsewhere in the Himalayas, Bhutan disputes its border with China, especially in an area called Doklam, which is on the border between Bhutan, China, and India. The small country is reportedly interested in making a deal with China, but India has opposed any progress. The reason is that the territory lies in a strategic location that could allow China to block off the eastern part of India from the rest of the country. Bhutan also disputes this section in its north, which is controlled by China. Moving on, Myanmar and Thailand have yet to determine who owns two small islands off their west coast. I will also briefly point out the minor disputes between Singapore and Malaysia caused by Singapore's land reclamation. Now, I'll quickly mention the minor disputes between Malaysia, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia over some minor stretches of territory. But what's unexpected is that the Philippines claims the north part of the island of Borneo, which is officially part of Malaysia. See, the land was once leased to the British by a sultan ruling over the territory and several Philippine islands, and the Philippines sees itself as the successor to the sultan. In 2020, the Philippines reactivated its claim for the first time in 60 years, arguing that the land should be returned to the Philippines. Still, a much larger concern for the region is here in the South China Sea. Several islands in the Spratly and Paracel Islands, plus the Scarborough Shoal, are occupied by China, where it has built artificial islands on reefs to house military installations. China claims all the territory within this 9-dash line, which overlaps with Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and the Philippine claims. We will also cover this more in another video, so now we head north to Taiwan, an independently governed island that China claims as part of its territory. Since the Republic of China retreated to Taiwan after losing the Chinese Civil War in 1949, Taiwan's government, which calls itself the Republic of China, has maintained claims over mainland China and many former territories of the Chinese Empire. So, it has kept many of the same disputes as the People's Republic of China, and even some that the PRC had resolved. This means that Taiwan also claims the area of the South China Sea within the 9-dash line. It also means that technically Taiwan has border disputes with Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Pakistan, India, Russia, North Korea, and Japan. Until 2002, Taiwan also claimed all of Mongolia as its territory, which is just insane. For similar reasons, South Korea disputes Russia's border, disagreeing with a North Korean agreement to give the island of Notundo to Russia. But since the territory is on the border with North Korea, it's pretty much useless for South Korea until it reunites with the North. Anyway. South Korea and Japan have clashed over the ownership of the small island of Dokdo, or Takeshima in Japanese, which is administered by South Korea. Japan also has a spat with China and Taiwan over the uninhabited Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands, which Japan controls. The territory is near important shipping lanes and fishing areas and has potential oil and gas reserves. In 2012, the Japanese government bought the islands from their owner, a Japanese citizen, leading to massive protests all over China and boycotts of Japanese products. At the very north of Japan, these 4 islands off the coast of Hokkaido in the Sea of Okhotsk are claimed by Japan but have been controlled by Russia since the end of World War II. The two countries never signed a peace treaty, so they technically remain at war. Moving east across the Pacific, the US-Canada maritime border in the Juan de Falco Strait near Vancouver is also disputed in a few small sections of the water. A ways north, the Dixon Entrance at the south of Alaska is disputed where the US and Canadian waters begin, leading to regular disputes between American and Canadian fishermen. Moving up, we get to the Beaufort Sea between Alaska and Canada, where the two countries disagree about where to draw the sea boundary, leaving a triangle of the Arctic Ocean claimed by both countries. The US also claims that Canada's Northwest Passage is international waters, but Canada of course disagrees. As the planet gets hotter, tensions could rise as this becomes a viable shipping route. By the way, the Whiskey War, which we've covered before between Canada and Denmark, was resolved in 2022. So Denmark now has a border with Canada. Pretty cool. But finally, Makia Seal Island, 10 miles off the coast of Maine, is claimed by both the US and Canada but is administered by Canada. Now let's head to the Caribbean, where you probably already are familiar with Guantanamo Bay, where the US has a military base and prison. The US has leased the territory from Cuba since 1903 and has maintained it even after the Cuban Revolution and objections by Fidel Castro. Slightly south is the Navas Island, a tiny island claimed by both Haiti and the US. The US has claimed the island since the 1856 Guano Islands Act and has held it ever since. See, in 1856 the US made a law stating that any unclaimed island containing guano deposits belonged to the United States. I don't know, I mean, why not? So that's the case for two other Caribbean islands as well, Serenilla Bank and Bajo Nuevo, both partially submerged reefs and some tiny islets administered by Colombia. The US and Jamaica claim both, while Honduras claims Serenilla Bank and Nicaragua claims Bajo Nuevo. Heading westward, Belize and Guatemala disagree on their border based on colonial treaties from hundreds of years ago. The dispute is being deliberated in the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Heading back south, we arrive at the border between Venezuela and Guyana. Venezuela claims everything west of the Essequibo River, or nearly 2/3 Guyana's territory. Venezuelans voted in December 2023 to annex the territory, but have yet to actually invade. Guyana also disputes the southern part of its border with Suriname in the New River Triangle. This long-standing dispute has yet to be resolved, but the territory is currently occupied by Guyana. Suriname also disputes its eastern border with French Guiana, which has been disputed since 1860, though part of the border dispute was resolved in 2021. Going south, Brazil disputes this island in the Mamoré River and several other small river islands on its border with Bolivia. Moving east, Brazil and Uruguay still have several undefined borders, notably this triangular area called the Rincon de Artigas. On the corner of the two countries where two rivers meet, the uninhabited island called Brazilian Island is also claimed by both nations. Our next stop in the Americas is right here, off the coast of Argentina. The Falkland Islands, called the Malvinas by Argentina, have been occupied by the British since 1833. Argentina has continued to claim the islands off its coast, arguing that they inherited them from Spain. In 1982, the tension came to a head when dictator Leopoldo Galtieri ordered Argentina to invade the islands, hoping for a swift victory. This land invasion provoked a firm response from the UK, and Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher sent 2 aircraft carriers and other ships to the islands, where they landed on May 21st and started fighting the 5,000 Argentine troops on the island. On June 14th, Argentina surrendered, ending the Falklands War. The loss led to the collapse of Argentina's dictatorship and remains a sore subject to this day. The island's inhabitants voted in a 2013 referendum to remain a part of Britain, but Argentina maintains its claim. Speaking of Argentina, it's unclear where its southern border with Chile lies near the southern Patagonian icefield. Most of the border was defined in the 1990s, but a small portion of this uninhabitable land remains unresolved. Also, in 2021, Chile claimed all of this water, which overlaps with Argentina's claim, breaking a 1984 treaty between the two countries. Now let's get back to Africa, where Libya claims about 32,000 square kilometers of Algeria's territory, but does not control it. A long way south, we arrive at the western border of Ivory Coast, where the village of Kbaba, near Guinea, has been disputed since Guinean troops occupied the village in 2013 and again in 2016. Head east and you'll find this triangle of land around the village of Kouadou, split between Burkina Faso, Benin, and Togo. The territory was declared neutral in 2008, but people born there are now considered citizens of Benin. The Okpara River borders Benin and Nigeria, and several villages on the river are disputed between the two. Moving further east, Equatorial Guinea and Cameroon dispute an island in the Ntim River. Similarly, the border along the Congo River, dividing the Republic of the Congo and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, is unclear, leaving several islands in disputed territory. Just southwest of the capital cities of Kinshasa and Brazzaville, these river islands are shown on Google Maps with dotted lines, indicating unclear borders. On its southern border, the DRC has a disputed border with Zambia. Zambia deployed troops on the Congolese side of the border near Chiangi in the DRC in 2020. The dispute dates back to colonial treaties between the British Empire and Belgium and includes the right bank of the Lunkinda River. Heading south for a moment, Zambia and Zimbabwe disagree on Sindabesi Island in the Zambezi River. Next we head to Swaziland, now known as Eswatini, which claims some parts of South Africa to the north and southeast that belonged to it historically. Moving up north again, Tanzania and Malawi argue over some islands in Lake Nyasa. Kind of makes sense when you consider that Malawi claims the entire surface of the lake, except for the Mozambique part, but Tanzania wants to draw the line halfway. Further north in Rwanda, the Akanyaru River changed course in 1965 after heavy rains, making it unclear whether the farmland on its banks belonged to Burundi or Rwanda. A bit further north, the DRC and Uganda can't agree on who owns Rukwansi Island in Lake Albert. The Congolese took over the island after a skirmish in 2007. The two nations also argue over fishing rights in the lake. Okay, we're almost out of Africa, but we've got to mention South Sudan, the newest country on the continent. It has an ongoing dispute with Sudan, which ruled it until 2008. Sudan continues to control the mineral-rich area of Kafia Kinji, and it retook the town of Heklik in 2012. The area around the city of Abyei was declared to be temporarily part of both countries and was meant to be demilitarized. Still, the oil-rich area is currently controlled by Sudan. Ongoing fighting between the two countries is making it hard to find a resolution. There are a few other disputed areas between the two, but if that wasn't bad enough for South Sudan, it also has disputes with Uganda and Kenya. Minor clashes broke out in 2014 over the ill-defined border with Uganda, which remains unresolved. Meanwhile, the Elimi Triangle bordering South Sudan and Kenya is administered by Kenya but claimed by both. Alright, we're almost done with Africa, but we have to make one last stop. So officially, Somalia looks like this, but since 1991, the western part of the country has been ruled separately as Somaliland. See, Somalia was once split into an Italian and a British colony, and Somaliland was the part under British control. In January 2024, Ethiopia made a deal to build a port in Somaliland, anchoring Somalia and souring the relations between Somalia and Somaliland. Alright, now we head to the Indian Ocean off the coast of Madagascar. First, Mayotte is one of 4 islands in the Comoros archipelago. It voted to remain part of France in the 1970s and is now an overseas department of France, making it the furthest reach of the European Union. Still, neighboring Comoros continues to claim the island as theirs. Comoros and Madagascar claim 2 other nearby territories, Banque de Gaïs Island and the Glorioso Islands, which are part of France's southern territories. Madagascar also claims Bassa da India, Europa Island, and Juan de Nova Island in France's southern territories. These islands have things like military installations and weather stations, but otherwise there is pretty much nothing on these islands worth fighting for. Similarly, off the east coast of Madagascar, the island of Tromelin has nothing but a weather station and a military outpost. It is administered by France but claimed by Madagascar and Mauritius. Moving east into the middle of the Indian Ocean, the Chagos archipelago is administered by the British but claimed by Mauritius. The British forcibly deported the island's population in the 1960s to the Seychelles and Mauritius. They soon opened a joint US-UK military base on the island of Diego Garcia, which continues to operate to this day. Finally, we head to the Pacific. Wake Island is a US territory used as a military base that is claimed by the nearby Marshall Islands. Heading south, Swains Island is part of American Samoa, a US territory, but is claimed by Tokelau, a dependency of New Zealand. Confusingly, New Zealand does not claim the islands, so yeah, I'm not really sure whose it is. Our almost last stops are Matthew and Hunter Island, 2 islands part of France's New Caledonia territory but are claimed by neighboring Vanuatu. It seems like we've covered just about everywhere, but there's one glaring omission: Antarctica. See, countries like Argentina, Australia, Chile, France, New Zealand, Norway, and the UK have claimed a part of the cold continent as their own, and some of those claims overlap. But the 1959 Antarctic Treaty does not formally recognize these claims, and it freezes the possibility of any future claims. Instead, it treats all Antarctica as open to scientific investigation and insists that Antarctica shall be used for peaceful purposes only. In reality, the area is inhabited by scientists at research stations and penguins on the coast, so it's not like anyone is going to war over it or anything. But that's pretty much everything. Let us know in the comments if you want a deeper dive into some of these disputes. But that's it for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.